Imagine two people earning exactly the same salary, living in the same city, starting with the same savings, and making one small decision differently every month. Alex saves every extra dollar. He keeps his money in a high-yield savings account because he wants safety, certainty, and a balance that never suddenly drops. Brian does something that feels much less comfortable. He keeps an emergency fund in cash, but every month he puts the rest into a low-cost broad market index fund. Alex looks at Brian during a market downturn and thinks, "See? That's why I save." Brian looks at Alex 10 years later and thinks, "See? That's why I invest." They both think they made the smarter choice. They're both missing something, because the gap between saving and actually building wealth doesn't show up on day one. It appears slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. And by the time you can see it, the difference can be tens of thousands of dollars. So let's make this fair. Alex and Brian are both 30 years old. Both live in Chicago. Both earn $80,000 a year. Both have $20,000 already saved. Neither has credit card debt. Neither receives an inheritance. Neither gets lucky with a business or cryptocurrency. From this point forward, they can each put $1,000 a month toward building wealth. Alex saves it. Brian invests it. Same people, same income, same starting point. Only one decision changes, and that's where this gets interesting. Alex's plan sounds almost impossible to criticize. He keeps the $20,000 in a high-yield savings account earning 4% annually. Then, at the end of every month, he adds another $1,000. No stock market crashes. No scary headlines. No watching an account fall 18% in 6 months. Just saving. Brian takes a different approach. He keeps the same $20,000 starting balance, but he treats part of it as long-term investment capital. He puts the $1,000 monthly contribution into a diversified stock market index fund and assumes a 7% average annual return over the long run. Not guaranteed, not smooth. Some years will be negative. Some years will be spectacular. But we're comparing the mathematics of two different strategies, not promising either return. On day one, Alex feels better. His money is sitting there. Brian's account can move up and down. And this is where people make the first mistake. They confuse emotional comfort with financial performance. Feelings and math are two very different things. Let's go to the first checkpoint. After 1 year, Alex has personally contributed $12,000 during the year. Add that to his original $20,000, and he has put $32,000 of his own money into the account. At 4%, his balance is roughly $33,037. That's about $1,037 above what he personally contributed. Brian has also contributed $12,000, bringing his total personal contributions to $32,000. At a hypothetical 7% average annual return, his balance is roughly $33,838. The difference? About $801. That's not life-changing. Alex can look at that number and say, exactly. Why take the risk for $800? And honestly, after 1 year, that's a reasonable question. But now we move to year 3. Alex has personally put in another $24,000 over those 3 years. His total contributions are now $56,000. At 4%, his account is approximately $60,727. Brian has also contributed $56,000. His investment account, assuming the same 7% average return, is approximately $64,589. The gap is now about $3,862. Still not enormous, but notice what's happening. Neither person increased the monthly contribution. Neither received a raise. Neither worked a second job. The difference came from what the existing money was allowed to do. Alex's money earned interest. Brian's money earned returns. And then those returns started earning returns themselves. That's compounding. But we're not done. Because this is where the emotional story starts changing. Go to year 5. Alex has now contributed $60,000 of his own money, plus his original $20,000, for $80,000 total contributions. His account has grown to roughly $90,719. On paper, that's $10,719 of growth. Sounds great until you subtract everything else. His 4% interest isn't necessarily 4% in his pocket. If that interest is taxable, the after-tax return is lower, and inflation is quietly reducing what those dollars can buy. Suppose inflation averages 3% over the long run, A 4% nominal savings return doesn't mean your purchasing power increased by 4%. It means the money grew by 4% before taxes, while the cost of goods may have risen by around 3%. That's the part the account balance doesn't show. Brian's account, under the same 5-year 7% assumption, is about $99,945. His personal contributions are still exactly $80,000. So his paper gain is roughly $19,945. Alex's gain is about $10,719. The difference has now reached approximately $9,226. And here's the important part. Alex didn't make a mistake by saving. He made a mistake only if he believed saving and investing were the same thing. They're not. Saving protects money you may need soon. Investing is designed to grow money you don't need soon. That distinction changes everything. Now imagine Alex checking his account at the end of year 5. He sees almost $91,000. He feels successful, and he is. He saved $60,000 of new money while earning $10,719 in growth. That's discipline. That's progress. But Brian sees almost $100,000. He contributed exactly the same amount. The difference isn't that Brian somehow worked harder. The difference is that his capital had more opportunity to compound. And this is the first flip point. At the beginning, the difference was only $801. By year 5, it was more than $9,200. The gap didn't come from one dramatic decision. It came from thousands of dollars, quietly compounding in the background. And this is why the phrase, "I'm just going to save more," can be both responsible and dangerously incomplete. If you're saving for a car next year, that's sensible. If you're building an emergency fund, that's sensible. If you're preparing for a down payment in 2 years, cash can be exactly where the money belongs. But if you're talking about money you won't need for 15 or 20 years, leaving all of it in cash creates a completely different problem. You're protecting the number. But are you protecting the purchasing power? Because those are not the same thing. And Alex is about to discover another uncomfortable reality. His account balance is going up every year, but the world around him is getting more expensive. A $90,000 balance 5 years from now isn't automatically equivalent to $90,000 of purchasing power today. That's why wealthy households don't simply ask, "How much did my account grow?" They ask a second question. How much did my money grow after inflation, taxes, fees, and time? That's a much harder question, and it's also the question that determines whether you're actually getting richer. Now let's push the comparison one step further. At year 5, Alex has nearly $91,000. Brian has nearly $100,000. Brian's lead is about $9,226, but neither person has reached the stage where compounding becomes truly dramatic. That happens later, because the first 5 years are mostly about contributions. The next 15 years are increasingly about what the existing money does, and that's the part most people underestimate. Think about the difference between earning a return on $20,000 and earning a return on $200,000. At 7%, $20,000 produces about $1,400 in 1 year. At 7%, $200,000 produces about $14,000. Same percentage, completely different dollar impact. The percentage didn't change, the base changed, and once the base gets large enough, your money can start producing more money than your monthly contribution. That's the moment saving alone struggles to replicate. But before we call Brian the winner, we need to do something most financial videos don't do. We need to stop. Because if I only show you Brian's bigger number and Alex's smaller number, I'm not giving you the truth. I'm giving you a sales pitch. And the real story is much more interesting than that. Now let's move to year 10. Alex has contributed $120,000 over the decade, plus his original $20,000, for $140,000 of total personal contributions. At an assumed 4% annual savings rate, his balance is approximately $167,227. So Alex has earned about $27,227. That's real money. Brian has contributed the same $120,000, plus the same original $20,000, but at a hypothetical 7% average annual return. His investment account is approximately $193,484. His growth is about $53,484. The difference is now roughly $26,257. And remember, Neither person changed their monthly contribution. That's the power of compounding becoming visible. But here's where we need to get precise. Brian doesn't actually get to keep every dollar of that $53,484 automatically. There can be investment expenses. There can be taxes depending on the account. There can be capital gains when investments are sold. And, most importantly, there can be volatility. If the market falls 25% in year 7, Brian's $150,000 account could temporarily fall to around $112,500. Alex's savings account might keep moving upward. That difference matters psychologically. Alex could sleep comfortably through the crash. Brian might be staring at a statement showing tens of thousands of dollars less than he had 6 months earlier. So let's be fair. The investment return is compensation for accepting uncertainty. It isn't free money. Now let's look at the hidden costs behind both choices. The first one is taxes. Savings account interest is generally taxable as ordinary income in a taxable account. If Alex earns $6,000 of interest and falls into a hypothetical 22% federal marginal bracket, about $1,320 could go to federal income tax before considering state taxes. So the advertised interest rate isn't necessarily the rate Alex keeps. The second hidden cost is inflation. Suppose inflation averages 3%. A 4% nominal return produces only about a 1% real return before taxes, using a simple approximation. That means Alex's money is growing in dollars, but its purchasing power is growing much more slowly. The third hidden cost is fees. An index fund charging 0.03% on $200,000 costs about $60 a year. A fund charging 1% would cost about $2,000 a year on that same balance. That's a $1,940 annual difference. Tiny percentages become real dollars when balances get large. The fourth hidden cost is behavior, and this one doesn't appear on any statement. If Brian sells his investments every time the market falls 20%, his theoretical 7% return becomes irrelevant. He can destroy the compounding advantage by repeatedly buying high and selling low. So the investment strategy only works if the investor can actually stay invested. Now let's go to year 20. This is where the story changes dramatically. Alex has personally contributed $240,000 over 20 years, plus his original $20,000. That's $260,000 of total contributions. At 4% with monthly deposits, his account reaches approximately $423,000. Brian has also contributed exactly $260,000. At a hypothetical 7% average annual return, his account reaches approximately $703,000. The difference is around $280,000. That's not a typo. Same person-level inputs, same monthly contribution, same starting capital, same 20-year period. One strategy produces roughly $423,000. The other produces roughly $703,000 under these assumptions. The gap is about $280,000, and this is the moment where the original question becomes much clearer. Saving wasn't useless. Saving created the capital. Investing gave the capital a chance to compound faster. You need the first before you can meaningfully use the second. But there's another trap here. People often hear a comparison like this and immediately say, "Fine, I'll invest everything." That's also wrong, because cash has a job. An emergency fund isn't supposed to beat the stock market. It's supposed to be there when your car breaks down, when your income stops, when your roof needs repair, or when an unexpected $4,000 bill arrives. If Brian has $20,000 in investments but no emergency cash, he might be forced to sell after a market crash. Imagine the market falls 25%. His $20,000 becomes $15,000. Then his transmission fails and he needs $8,000. Now he has to sell investments while they're down. That's not a theoretical inconvenience. That's a real risk. This is why the better strategy isn't saving versus investing. It's knowing which dollars belong in each bucket. And this brings us to the number everybody loves to brag about: the balance. Someone says, "I've got $500,000. Sounds impressive, but that number alone doesn't tell you enough. Was it built with $300,000 of contributions and $200,000 of growth? Was it inherited? Is it sitting in cash? Is it invested? Is it locked inside a retirement account? Does the person have $40,000 of high-interest debt? Is the money actually available? The headline number can be real and still tell you almost nothing about financial strength. Now let's expose the layers underneath it. First, purchasing power. If inflation averages 3%, prices roughly double over about 24 years. So $500,000 decades from now won't buy what $500,000 buys today. Second, taxes. The account balance isn't necessarily the after-tax amount you can spend. Third, fees. A 1% annual fee on a $500,000 portfolio is $5,000 every year. Over 10 years, that's potentially $50,000 in fees before considering the compounding effect of those dollars. Fourth, volatility. A portfolio worth $500,000 that falls 30% becomes $350,000. Nothing has been permanently lost if the assets recover and you don't sell, but emotionally, that $150,000 decline is very real. Fifth, liquidity isn't the same as $500,000 decline. And sixth, behavior. The best mathematical strategy fails if you abandon it at the worst possible moment. Now let's bring in actual data. The FDIC's standard deposit insurance coverage is $250,000 per depositor, per insured bank, for each ownership category. That's important because it tells you what deposit insurance is designed to protect. It protects eligible deposits at insured banks up to that limit. It does not mean every financial asset has the same protection, and it doesn't mean cash automatically grows wealth faster than productive assets. For investment costs, consider how small percentages scale. A 0.03% annual expense ratio on $500,000 is $150 per year. A 0.50% expense ratio is $2,500. That's a $2,350 yearly difference. Over 20 years, the compounding impact can become much larger than the annual fee itself. This is why wealthy investors obsess over seemingly boring details. Not because 0.47% sounds exciting, because 0.47% multiplied across a large balance for decades is not boring at all. Now, if Alex wants to improve his outcome without suddenly becoming an aggressive investor, he can use a 3-step strategy. Step 1 is to separate emergency savings from long-term money. If he needs $20,000 for emergencies, keep the appropriate amount in liquid cash rather than treating that money like investment capital. Step 2 is to define the time horizon. Money needed within 1 or 2 years has a very different job from money intended for retirement 20 years away. Step 3 is to automate the long-term contribution. If Brian invests $1,000 every month automatically, he doesn't have to make a fresh emotional decision every payday. And here's the lever that changes the entire comparison. What if Brian increases his investment by just $200 a month? Instead of $1,000, he invests $1,200. Over 20 years at a hypothetical 7% annual return, that extra $200 a month can add roughly $105,000 to the final portfolio. Not because $200 is enormous, because 20 years gives it time to compound. That's the lesson people miss. The first $200 feels small. The last $200 can be worth far more because the earlier dollars have already been working. Now let's return to Alex and Brian. Alex and Brian both walked away thinking they made the smart play. Alex believed safety was the answer. Brian believed investing was the answer, but neither one actually ran the full numbers. Alex was right that saving is necessary. Brian was right that long-term investing can create more growth. But the real trap isn't saving or investing. The real trap is making the decision based on hype, headlines, or someone else's opinion instead of running the numbers for your own situation. If you need the money next year, don't gamble with it just because someone promised you higher returns. If you don't need the money for 20 years, don't automatically keep every dollar in cash simply because watching the balance fall makes you uncomfortable. Give each dollar a job. Emergency dollars protect you. Short-term dollars give you flexibility. Long-term dollars need a chance to grow. And if you're wondering what happens when you combine disciplined saving with disciplined investing, that's where the mathematics gets even more interesting. Because the goal was never to become the person with the biggest savings account. And it was never to become the person taking the biggest investment risk. The goal is to build a system where today's discipline creates tomorrow's financial freedom. Alex saved, Brian invested. But the smartest move wasn't choosing one word over the other. It was understanding when each one matters. So ask yourself one final question. Did you include everything? Because the answer that includes everything is the only answer that matters.